of Lake Superior in Grand Marais, Minnesota, on the very edge of the United States, just a bit south of the Canadian border. And normally we welcome students to our campus and folks to hear stories from our campus, which is a lovely place to gather, and we can't wait to bring all of you there, although I'm not sure that all 350 of you who are here tonight fit into any of our buildings. But as the world has changed at North House, we have wanted to find a way to bring our mission of enriching lives and building community through traditional Northern craft alive in a new way, as the world has made it not possible to gather on our campus. And so about 7 weeks ago, we launched an initiative called Crafting in Place, which has been incredible. We've been able to hire our artisan instructors to bring their stories alive through live Facebook and Instagram events, through videos, through all kinds of, through blog entries and through webinars like this. And our hope is that those stories are offering some insight into the power of craft, a connection to the greater community that surrounds craft and surrounds those of us who are staying at home as a way of taking care of our community, but also very much have our minds on all the folks out there doing other things. So tonight, we got the opportunity to do something really fun and partner with another wonderful institution that celebrates traditional Northern craft, Vesterheim Norwegian American Museum. And together, we've invited some longtime friends of both places, Harley and Norma Refsal, here in order to share their stories with us. And so I'm gonna go ahead and in 1 second, turn it over to Leah Lovelace, the program director at Vesterheim. But I do wanna offer one other little piece here, which is that if something goes awry and the internet breaks and we lose connection to each other tonight, which we certainly hope won't happen, our plan is that we will record this conversation and we will email out a link to it as soon as possible tomorrow. So if something goes askew, which hopefully it won't, but if it does, there is a plan to make sure that you get to hear Harley and Norma's story. So I'd like to turn this over to Leah Lovelace to tell us a little bit more about our guests for this evening. Leah?
Thanks so much, Jessa. It's so great for Vesterheim to be part of this collaboration tonight, and we're just so excited to be doing something that feels like we're connecting with our community in a virtual way. And so we're really grateful to have both of these amazing artists here with us this evening. And it's just wonderful they're willing to have an invitation for us into their home to help us kick off my celebrations a little early. I've been practicing my language lesson from Maren Johnson that was on social media this week. It's Gratulera mat dagen. So happy Mai early. Since we can't safely go to Norway, we have the next best thing. Harley and Norma bringing stories and travels through Norway to us through the Zoom presentation as they share beautiful Norwegian folk art objects from their personal collection. Norma Refsal's passion for metalsmithing began when her family lived in Telemark, Norway in the late 1980s. After gaining experience, she began creating jewelry for the 21st century based on traditional Scandinavian-inspired or neo-Nordic designs. She creates jewelry for daily wear out of silver, leather, wood, and enamel, finding the simplicity of the design to be both timeless and elegant. Norma has been actively teaching Sami-inspired embroidery and bracelet classes at North House, Vesterheim, and many other places all over the country, and I bet we have some of her former students here with us tonight. Harley Refsal is a Vesterheim gold medalist who has taught Scandinavian figure carving throughout the United States and Norway. He was honored by H.M. Harald V, the King of Norway, with the St. Olaf Medal of Honor for his efforts in reinvigorating Scandinavian figure carving in both the US and Norway. A retired professor of Scandinavian folk art at Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, he also regularly demonstrates and gives many presentations about Norwegian folk art and traditions. He is the author of several books, and he was named the 2012 Woodcarver of the Year by the magazine Wood Carving Illustrated. He's one of the founding board members of the North House Folk School, and he has been teaching at both our institutions and lots of other places for decades. So without further ado, I would like to formally introduce Harley and Norma.
Hi there, I'm Norma.
And I'm Harley.
Thank you for inviting us for this evening. It's, you know, we're looking forward to, as we always do when we meet either at North House or at Vesterheim, for spontaneous discussions, things about folk art, one of our favorite conversations in the world. Actually, I'd have to say that the two of us, now that Harley's retired, our kids are gone, we talk about folk art a lot. We talk about it probably on a daily basis. I'll sneak down into his studio and have comments, and he'll do the same with mine. Or if we'll be out on a walk and in the woods and see a great branch on a tree. So folk art has indeed been a very important part of our life. And we're so happy to share it with all of you. Now this is because we don't have a moving camera to stand up and move around and show you things. We'll be holding them up and telling stories that go with it about both the pieces and the history of folk art, the past, the present, and how the two have come together and have enriched all of our lives. I think the first thing we'll do, though, is we echo Leah's greeting for Syttende Mai. Syttende Mai will be Sunday, the 17th of May. It celebrates the Constitution Day of Norway. In 1814, they signed their constitution at Eidsvoll shortly after, and that was shortly after the Napoleonic Wars, where they were going to be ceded to Sweden, which indeed they were, and remained that way until they parted ways from Sweden in 1905. But it is their Constitution Day that they have continued to celebrate, and they celebrate in high style. It's a national holiday, and unfortunately, this year it's going to be a virtual national holiday. We read that the cannon will be fired at Akershus Fortress at 1 o'clock on Syttende Mai, and then right after that, the whole of Norway and anyone who's celebrating is invited to step outside and sing the national anthem. We assume that our friends will be in their bunads, they'll be eating ice cream, they'll be having pølse or hot dogs, and music and dance, but it'll probably be done with a smaller group in their own home. So, go Syttende Mai, hip hip hurra, gratulerer med dagen. They all work for celebrating the day.
Everyone would be dressed in their finest on Syttende Mai, whether it be Main Street of Oslo or in the small towns. People would be in elegant clothing, the very best clothing they had. And there's a sea then of red, white, and blue sløyfer, or ribbons of some kind, varying from a size something like this to very large things that cover your whole chest. People who have bunads, or the Norwegian traditional outfits that can be worn for special occasions, including weddings and whatnot. They're worn like tuxedos, but they would be lining the streets too in their very formal bunads. We've been in Norway for Syttende Mai on 2 different occasions. I was there as a student in the 1960s, 80s, that had some, so I saw one Syttende Mai in Oslo, and that was a big city celebration. And then the other time we were living in Rauland, a small town up in the mountains in rural Norway, and that community has about 150 people, and they both had their charm. The bands marched. They were all dressed to the nines, and they were really, really important days for the whole country and for families, for absolutely everyone. We're going to tonight try to talk about touch on some of the high points of folk art and the different types of folk art through stories. And through a story, obviously the country of Norway is long, it's vast from top to bottom, from north to south. I have a map here that I'll hold up, and this line here is the Arctic Circle. So about a third of the country is north of the Arctic Circle, and then 2/3 is below that. The red dot at the bottom, sort of this part of the spoon shape of the country, that was Rowland, where we lived. And this part up here, north of the Arctic Circle, this is what is typically referred to, whether formally or informally, as Sami land, because this is where the Samis live and can have their lives, their work, everything, their culture is up here. And so we're going to start here by looking at some art, some handwork that starts up here, and then we're going to go down the coast.
But let's start with.
But let's first start
with
the story.
With the story. Yeah.
What can we learn from a piece of folk art?
One single piece.
This is a wooden spoon, obviously, and very, very common and used for absolutely everything, for food, but it is also highly symbolic in Norwegian culture. This is a very special spoon to us because there's a story behind the fact that we have this as well. Norma's parents visited Norway in the 1980s.
They were there several times, so one time in the 80s.
And one of the times that they were there, and Norma's mother's ancestors all came from Norway. And so her folks were visiting the farm that their family had come from. And on the farm, it was old buildings, a very traditional farm, some log buildings, grass roofs, sod roofs on top of some of the buildings. And one of the buildings was the old house. And it was a log building, and they had maintained it. The two brothers that live there now had maintained it as sort of a family museum. And so when her parents, Ken and Julie, went in there, it was like stepping back centuries, and it was a thrill for Norma's mother. And she noticed that there was one thing on the wall was a shelf that had several different handmade spoons. Some were decorated more lavishly, others were plainer, but wooden spoons that had obviously been carved. And so Norma's mom asked if it was okay if she took a photo of of those spoons, because she said, one of my sons-in-law is a wood carver, and I'd like to take a picture to show him if that's okay with you. And they said, yeah, that's all right. And so she took the picture, and they talked some more. And as they were leaving the house, this fellow pulled this off the shelf and went and gave it to Julie and said, here, you can give this to your son-in-law. And so it was fun to start to study this spoon, because it was, first of all, the size of it tells a bigger story than just that this is a spoon. It's so large that you can hardly get it in, you really couldn't get it in your mouth. But you can see that it's very nibbled on the outside here. In other words, it was used as a sort of a bowl with a handle on it. And that reflects the fact that this was from a house that was so small that from its original being built, that there undoubtedly was not a table in the house. That would have been taking up too much space. It was a small log building that had not a stove either, because it would have been a fire pit at the middle of the room, and then a hole in the ceiling directly above it, something called an orestove. And the people would have gone and dipped using it like a dipper out of that common pot of sort of oatmeal, gruel, and then you'd just retreat to and maybe lean against a built-in bed and just nibble around the edges like this. Hence, all the varnish and finish is worn off here. These are all teeth marks from having eaten it off this particular way.
But tell about the decor in the middle too. How
Yeah.
it's been inspired.
But in the inside, then it's beautifully done with acanthus or with kolarosing. Yes, kolarosing. And the design is, and kolarosing, of course, is the incising with a knife tip and then rubbing a colorant in there of some kind. It could be bark from a tree that had been rubbed on something rough like a stone and making kind of a powder, and then rubbing that into the design that you've etched. So this would have been a very, very common thing, and it turned spoons had several functions. In addition to eating, it was also something that was very commonly used in courtship. As a young man, if I was going to be at an event or some sort of a group work project of some kind in the 1700s, 1800s, and I knew that there was going to be, or suspected that there was going to be both young men and young women there, I would have had a spoon in my pocket that I had carved, just sort of discreetly poking out of my pocket like this, but enough so that it showed that there was something here that I had in mind. And if that led to conversation with a young lady, I might then present her with this. And if she took it and maybe got a smile out of her as well, that was a good sign. And this was hers to keep. It was my showing of my intentions, and it was showing in wood, not in words, that she was receiving this. She would have taken this home and used it. This was probably one of those very same spoons, nicely decorated. And there are lots and lots of examples of spoons at Vesterheim Museum here in Decorah. It was one of the things that when people immigrated to this country then, this was easy and a very cherished thing, of course, to take along. And
so I don't know if you wanted to say anything more about the decor. Because it's acanthus carving, we know that there are no acanthus leaves in Norway. So the inspiration for this would have come from the continent, which said something about how people were traveling back then and where the inspiration actually arose from. And other designs that could be used in a spoon were the illustrations that were used for the illuminated text of a Bible, from a Bible. And so there were many different inspirations that led to the creation of a very simple object. The spoon aside, we're going to leave the spoons now for a while, and we're actually going to start north of the Arctic Circle. We're going to start up in Sami land, and we're going to take an artifact that is a horse hame, or I'm sorry, it's a harness hame that is used for reindeer. And this has the date inscribed on it of 1744. It's made out of antler. It's highly decorated with the same kind of kolarosing technique done in a very hard surface, which antler is. And it tells you also that the reindeer had been domesticated to some point. The Sami live in the northern parts of Sweden, Norway, Finland, and the Kola Peninsula of Russia. The Kola Peninsula is quite a bit more isolated now from the rest of the Sami than the other three countries are. They are the indigenous people of Norway. They're indigenous people of those four different countries. They're not a country unto its own. One of the reasons we want to show you this antler piece with the kolarosing on it back from 1744, and then we're going to show you a knife And the knife is a piece that Harley bought in Jokkmokk in the probably somewhere, I don't know, 2000, 2005. And it's decorated with exactly the same style. And the whole idea, the history of the kålrosing technique goes back, it goes back centuries. There are finds, the Birch find, if any of you are familiar with that Viking find, which is just west of Stockholm, and they lived, and the Vikings were there from the 8th to the 10th century. There are a number of pictures on the Digital Museum of Sweden, of the art museum, and it shows the pieces from the Birch find that are done with the kålrosing technique. So the technique is old. The idea of decorating is quite old, and where you have a simple object but you embellish it, and you embellish it for a number of reasons. You embellish it possibly because you have a little more leisure time. You might embellish it with a religious symbol, or it could be simply a piece of folk art that has a function and has remained unembellished. But a lot of it has gone on to be embellished. Again, I'm going to move these little ones right here. We'll talk about those later. With the Sami and the reindeer, the reindeer for the traditional society have been a very integral part of their life. I have a number of pieces here I'm going to show you. The leather of the reindeer in this little handmade bag with the button made out of the reindeer leather, and it's been embellished with this technique, this embroidery technique of the pewter thread. Here's another little Sami piece, and this is a contemporary piece. This is another little Sami knife made out of leather and antler, and again, embellished with a kålrosing technique. Another very common and modern material is the pewter. The pewter used for embellishing all the way from bags to clothing to belts to knife sheaths. And one of the things that I do is to teach the pewter embroidery class, and we make jewelry. Or we make pieces like this that then we can put on. I've had students have put them on backpacks. These are the same technique as necklaces and brooches, bracelets, more of the same. And the embroidery technique dates back to finds in Viking finds. They didn't use pewter back then. The postaments were in either silver or gold. They weren't of pewter. But pewter was the perfect metal for a nomadic population at such a low melting point that they could take the alloy and melt it very easily, make a rod, put it through a drop plate, and actually make thread. And then that thread would have been wound around possibly reindeer sinew, very labor intensive, could have been wound around cotton, depending on the period, or around silk thread. Another technique that lots of us just know and love is the braided bracelet technique, different from the embroidery technique. And these classes are popular. I wear them. Lots of people that I know and students wear them and we wear them with pride. We wear them in solidarity for the Sami people, which are now probably their greatest challenge now is climate change. But the braided technique for bracelets and for jewelry is not an old technique. That one started occurring in Sami in the different communities in the Sami land, probably in the early 1900s when tourism started to come to that part of the world. And I have a photograph from a book that I borrowed from Vesterheim, and it shows the first Sami bracelet class, the first known Sami bracelet class, and that was in the early 30s. So the pewter thread, decorating making different kinds of jewelry and functional pieces. And then another kind of, and you can probably tell from all the things I'm showing that I'm very interested in jewelry and things that are quite small. So I have on this card here, I have a piece of jewelry that's made out of birch and antler, and it is a replica of a Sami drum, which is most of these pieces on this side are Sami made, that is used for religious purposes. The second little piece is a replica of a coffee bag, near and dear to everyone. And the third one is a little miniature kuksa. You can see here is a little fox. This one is made out of bone. That's another kuksa. And then the pieces on this side, the miniature kuksa, the brooches that have been decorated with kolarosing and birch root, those are pieces that I've made. The piece in the two pieces here that are quite heavily kolarosed are actually functional jewelry pieces. I don't typically wear a belt. And so for me to wear a small knife, I fashioned this piece of birch. I kolarosed it, decorated it, drilled the hole down here on the bottom, and then put this kind of a tab here, little metal tab that went through it, hooked the handle of the knife through that, fastened it up, tucked it under the pin, and now I too can wear a little tiny knife even though I don't have a belt. So that's a piece that I did in a class at Vesterheim with, I can't think of his name right now. Well, anyway, one of the teachers that have come here year after year, and he teaches large basket making, kolarosing, natural forms from the west coast of Norway. It'll come to me here in a minute what his name is. And so that's just in a nutshell some of the objects that are part of the folk art of the Sami. An example of reindeer antler, and an example of the pewter thread as it comes today to us. And we can buy it now commercially made. And Harley's going to talk about some more skeletal objects, skeletal and birch root objects.
This is a richly decorated kuksa, not so very deep, but this was what the antler piece of allowed. So, but here was also used to decorate the handle of a kuksa that was wood as well. Here's another material for the Sami, for northern Norway, Sweden, Finland, is the birch and spruce root. Yeah, and even though in the far north of the Arctic Circle, there aren't many big trees, like almost none, but there are, the far hard as these birch trees work to survive, there's a good root system. And so people go down on hands and knees, and even though it's cold, frozen a lot of the year, work the soil away and get long lengths of birch bark, or birch root, which then is cleaned, washed. It can often be split as well too, and that's used then for all kinds of things. Jewelry. This is a little knife sheath that a friend of his made for him to hold a facsimile, a reproduction of a Viking knife for women. And then she took the knife and wove the little sheath out of birch root, and it's a lovely little necklace that Harley oftentimes will wear in place of a necktie. And then the baskets. Yeah. And a basket, this one, it was made by a lady who, she gave it to me and said that you can use this as a drinking vessel too. You just soak it in hot water for a while, and it swells up until it's watertight. So anyway, something as we wouldn't even think of. In fact, I think I've read that in this country, to pick up roots or to dig up roots is illegal. But it is not illegal there, and it's a common thing in the absence of trees that exist farther down the coast. As
The map again.
we start to,
Oh, here it is. Oh, sorry, I have the map. We're gonna leave the north. We're gonna leave the north here, and we're gonna make our way now down the west coast into fishing country.
here, yep. This is the
Oh,
west
sorry,
coast.
I'm sorry. Well, this is the west coast.
This is, now we're getting into fishing, commercial fishing country, and it's been commercial fishing for a long time, summer and winter, which means that on the west coast, you're looking at some really cold days. But yet the fishing went on. And it was so cold a lot of times that if you were processing fish on board, it was easy enough, your hands would go numb and you would drop the knife and lose it. But here was an invention that was developed. If you have a really nice long handle, then you didn't have to just hold it with your hand, but the bulk of the knife is up in your sleeve, and you can just hold on with here. And as a result, then this becomes the blade of what's a long handle or a long lever that's used. And also, if you made these handles long enough and big enough, if you happen to lose the thing overboard, it would float, and so you wouldn't lose the knife.
Okay, that said, I tried it. I tried it once. I thought, well, does it really float? This is a very heavy knife blade. The handle is maybe 10 inches long. What happened was I put it in water and it tipped like this, and it very gradually started to go down. It didn't sink like a stone. It tipped up on end and then went in. So if you dropped it, you had to be pretty quick to pick it up.
But if you were in shallow water,
Okay,
you could dive
yes.
down and swim down and get it. Yeah.
Maybe swim down, probably not. So now and that's the only piece that we actually have from the fishing community. We have a number of artifacts, but we're not heavy into the fishing pieces on the west coast. But what we're going to do next, though, is start to go down into the more central part, into the larger part of the Spoon of Norway, and into the more central part of the country, where it becomes very heavily forested, and where wood is a part of their everyday life, everyday objects. There can hardly be a more ubiquitous material than wood.
And in this harsh climate here and high altitude, a lot of those trees aren't really perfect things to use for telephone poles at all. Instead, you get up into some of those places and it's almost like being in an enchanted forest, because when a little tree was starting to grow, maybe it was as big around as your little finger or not quite, and then a snowfall came and it tipped over, got bent, and then when the spring came and it kind of perked up again, and it maybe got caught under another branch. And through the years, that would grow and grow. And you'd have something that looked like that, and something that would make a perfect handle, for example, or a perfect C-clamp. This is birch. You can see this birch bark on here, and this would be a strong, this was gifted to me by a guy that lived in the area when we lived in, and this was, it was obviously late enough so that they had access to a tap and die machine, but this is a very inventive and good use for tools.
For a natural form.
For a natural form. I've also seen big versions like that were actually used as plows, because they were strong, birch, harsh climate, so those trees struggled to grow in the first place, and they were very, very, very hard.
Here's another example of a beautifully twisted piece, which makes you, one of the things that happened when we were over there, and these were pretty common, we started looking at the woods different. Whenever we would go for a walk, we would look at a piece, we would look at a branch, and they were more commonplace to see these. And if it was possible, we'd harvest it. If not, we would just admire it and think about what we would do if we had a piece like that.
We have hooks in our house that are hooks like this for clothes, for hanging the towel outside the shower.
You can take another clamp.
Here's a smaller clamp inspired by that bigger one. And one thing that is
And then all the tools
Yeah.
from. We have a number of tools to show you that have been made from natural forms, from one piece of wood. The next thing is something that's called a sculp.
This is this was on a farm. This was a facsimile of one. It's a modern version of one, but it was based on an old one. This was hollowed out, but it was out of wood. And there's a hook here on it, out of metal. And when a farmer would go out with a scythe to cut hay, this thing would be hooked on the back of his pants, or on a belt if he had a belt. And then water would be put in there, filled it about half with water, and then put a whetstone in there so that it stayed wet. And then as you were using that scythe up in front, if you hit a rock or it dulled somehow, you could reach behind you, pull this out of its wooden sheath, and tune up the scythe a bit, and then keep on your way.
Another one is the hay fork.
Yeah.
Where's the
And the hay fork is
It should be over there.
right here. This is also a natural form. It's thick, grew like that, strong, and braced here. This was a hay fork for getting hay when you were way up in the mountains. You'd cut it with a scythe, of course, and then to get a big ball of hay to take down to the barn. So you did many trips like that to get enough hay for the cows for the winter.
Bring it in close.
And this would have, if I had a huge pile of like a small haystack, then I would go on this side of the haystack and jab that in. They had a rope in here, and then I'd wrap the rope around this big pile of hay, and this would hold everything in place. And then I'd just take that rope and snug up to that ball of hay and lift it and carry it down the mountain for the supply for hay for the winter.
Another one piece, a very utilitarian piece made out of one piece of wood, was the whole concept of the wooden shoe. And the wooden shoes were often made by itinerant shoemakers who would go from farm to farm. This was their job. They would make the shoes for the entire family. This was most likely shoes for a rural family, someone in a rural family, because of the heavy cleats on the bottom for agricultural work. They would oftentimes pack them with some straw. They could either be too big, pack them with some straw to tighten them up and to give them a little more insulation. And this was also hollowed out from one piece of wood.
Yeah, the spikes made it work on ice as well. And here, just looking around and finding the right strange growth, and you have the handle growing right into the cup of the kuksa.
Another natural material. Oh, go ahead and show that one.
And here's another one. Speaking of tools, this would have been for in the house, of course, but a pine tree could be one of our Christmas trees in this country as well. Yeah, exactly.
To stir the porridge. You're making the rumbegrøt. You could stir it with that. This one of the pieces came off. I think we actually did use it for a while. But again, a natural form. Other products, sort of goods from the woods that were used commonly. Another product is birch bark. Very common in birch territory, and a wonderful material to create all sorts of vessels and baskets. I have behind me, and I'll grab it without taking everything down. Probably, aside from the canoe, it's probably the biggest one taught in the class, would be the birch bark backpack. And there are baskets that are woven. There are baskets that are folded and sewn and lashed together with the split root. And it's also used for, here's another example of a basket. These are all things that we've made over the years. A birch bark sheath for a knife, taught at, I think both at Vesterheim and at North House, any number of the birch bark classes. That one is made by Beth Homa, who's a...
I made the knife, she made the sheath.
She made the sheath. And then I have a picture, I don't have the piece here, but I have a picture of an outfit that I made at Nordic Fest for, I don't think they do it anymore, but for a number of years, there was, the windows of the stores were decorated. And I did a whole setup for the store in Decorah, a store called Fancy Pants. And I made the birch bark outfit for her, and she has a basket around her neck, and she has a full necklace on. And the rest of the window was, it was a setting for a very gracious tea event with the kransakaka and all of the fixings for it. But one more example of what you can do with birch bark. And then another example, I showed you the big birch bark basket. These are the miniature birch bark baskets. And these were made, they're both made by Charlie Mayo, who was, along with John Sasada, one of the very first teachers of birch bark up at North House. And we had the pleasure of having Charlie at Luther College one January term. And he taught with Harley just about the entire January term. And birch bark baskets that's his forte. And so these are examples of his work. So then from the birch bark, we're going to go back to the spoons. Harley just told you the story of the one spoon, setting it in time, setting it in a place. And now we're going back to the whole idea of spoons and their importance. He mentioned the spoon used in courting. This was probably the first spoon that was given. They could have been decorated more as the relationship intensified. And now this from the initial spoon, she probably received another spoon. And finally, the relationship was sealed, and now she was going to receive her engagement gift. And that is where?
Right,
that's
here.
Over here. This was not my engagement gift, but it takes the place of one. Now this is a mangla today.
And a mangla today is a mangle for ironing clothing, a mangle board. And this was, as you can see, it's smooth in the bottom, beautifully carved or painted, decorated in some way. And then the horse handle here, you would hold it like this, and the clothing, the wet clothing, like for example, an apron or something, would be wrapped around a completely rounded piece that looked like a rolling pin.
A big dowel.
And a big dowel. Yeah, put that on the table and tightly wrapped with the wet material, and then just rolling this back and forth, not with any heat or anything, but just with sheer muscle power, then pushing the wrinkles out of it. Not terribly effective, but that was what there was anyway. And so this was the final gift in that courtship procession, going from spoon to this. Then was the engagement gift. This was this kind of sealed the deal.
And it was very important that the suitor did his very best, because he not only needed to impress her, he needed to impress her father as well, to show that he was able to take care of her and any children that came later.
Yeah. There are incidentally at Vesterheim Museum here in Decorah, there is a wonderful collection of these mangle boards, or mangla today. And on the one hand, I've heard people say, now why in the world would people bring a big thing like that? You know, when you had limited space, you maybe had 1 or 2 trunks, 3 trunks, maybe for a big whole family. Why in the world, 100 and some years ago, would they have brought a mangle board along with them? And of course, the answer is, it was mom's engagement gift. I mean, why one would not leave that there? So those things were precious and were brought over as a good piece of Norway that they were bringing with them when they came over here. And if you have not had a chance to see the very extensive and wonderful collection at Vesterheim, they have a wonderful, wonderful bunch of
it's great to see.
Yeah.
And from there, after the engagement, then comes the wedding. And here's another set of spoons that would then have been carved. These are the wedding spoons, and they're carved from a single piece of wood, the wooden links between them, and they're used symbolically then at the wedding to show the joining of 2 people, 2 families.
Mm-hmm. And at the wedding feast, there would be a big cauldron or bowl of rummegrøt, and the bride and groom, with each their spoon, they were now joined together.
Also at the wedding, another vessel that was used, why don't you grab the ale hen? And this is a small ale hen, but beer, öl would have been brewed for the festivities, and a much larger bowl of ale would be there for everyone to drink. And these oftentimes were floating on the surface, and then you would dip into that, take a sip, and pass it around. So very, very celebratory, these are ornately done. They're lovely pieces. We were at the wedding of Phil Odin and Elsa Bigton's son, and Philip had carved a number of these as well as brewed the beer, and it was a wonderful celebration.
And when we lived in Telemark, in that small community, I got an invitation to a Christmas party with some of my classmates, and it was held at a farm where she was married to the person on the farm. There was many generations of that family in that farm, and the ale bowl was large. It was a carved wooden ale bowl. This was a pre-Christmas party, and there were several of these floating around in there, and it was very moving in that people would just gather and talk about, so where are you going to be over Christmas? Are you visiting on the West Coast, or where are you going to be? What are you going to do? And this then would be dipped down into the bowl of homemade beer, and sort of wound up. It sort of became a Christmas greeting. When you got done, God jul, skål, och gott nytt år.
Take a drop.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're going to move on to another piece of wood, and that is a primstav, the calendar stick, the 2-sided calendar stick that helped a pre-literate society. Oops, is that the right one? The right way. A pre-literate society, know what they should be doing at what time of year. One side was the winter side, one side was the summer side. And they were incised with little dashes that would signify the days. This is obviously a reproduction, and it's very carefully done, showing that every 7 days. Some of them probably weren't as sort of mathematical as this, because they were recently converted to Christianity, and they did not know how to read. But all of these symbols, a lot of them would mark the festival days for the Catholic Church, and a lot of them would also be indicative of things for the agricultural community. What should be done when? Planting of different things. If you lived on the coast, you'd have a different kind of calendar stick. If you lived up north, you'd have a different one yet. So they varied dramatically from part of the country to part of the country, but everybody had their way of telling what actually is coming next. And then Harley did he took that motif and created a modern rendition of a calendar stick using the primstav and pick and, you know, you sort of would pick and choose what the festivals were that were meaningful to our family and put it in a turn bowl.
Here would be the first day of winter with a mitten. Over here is a Christmas tree. Or you could have another one as the first day of summer, for example. And so, yeah, they varied from if you lived by the coast, if you lived up in the mountains or whatnot, but it was whatever days were important. Some days where there might be a picture or a carved in plow, and that meant if you're going to get a crop this year, you better have had your plowing done by this time, or you're going to be, it's not going to happen.
There's a small, this brooch right here that I did is even a smaller primstav yet, where I took motifs that were important to me and incorporated them into a piece of jewelry. The next thing we're going to move on now and talk about figure carving. And this is the thing that Harley has been, has helped revive flat plane carving, and there have been people all over the country and all over the world that are now enjoying this as a pastime. I just want, before he starts, I'm going to put those pieces right there, figure carved. They're the size of a match, book of matches. And then I'm going to put the bigger one, just hold that right there for comparison.
These are relatives, but this one ate better than that one did.
So that's just these are things that have remained in our home that we haven't let go. And I'm always asking him to go smaller and smaller and smaller, which is what those three little pieces there, which he then created a story about, but we won't go there right now.
A good bit of my inspiration for figure carving came from Norway, and for the first time when I was in Norway was when I was in a choir with Augsburg College, and in 1965, and we sang in a lot of small towns on the West Coast, and we oftentimes when we'd come to these little towns, they were small enough sometimes, so they didn't get a lot of tourists there. But here we came, 65 of us or something like that, and we were all dressed in the same color of clothes and whatnot. And we didn't come in under the wire, that's for sure. I mean, we were noticed. And they would, very often there would be a person sitting there, usually it was a guy, sitting there on a park bench or something with a bunch of carvings, and I was smitten. I thought, oh boy, that really looks fun. And so I bought a couple figures, not these two, but I bought a couple figures, one for my dad and one for an uncle of mine. And I don't have those two anymore, but some years ago, a couple years, 3 years ago or so, I found these two that they were both sort of victims of a dog. The dog had chewed off both shoes on this guy and one on the lady. But they were resurrectable, and they were wonderful examples of carving that was done not with an expensive set of tools, but they were done, it's safe to say, with just one big rough knife.
With one big knife, and thus result are these flat planes that are remaining.
And I tried, and that I was hooked. And so with a Mora kniv, a Mora knife, which later now that has kind of made my own version of that, so that it's gotten to be what changed the blade around a little bit, so now it's more like this. But there are probably some people here watching this that know a little bit what when I'm talking about, and maybe have a knife like this or figures like this yourselves as well. That then sort of got things back going in the popularity of it in Norway as well, when a man named Henning Engelsson started then to he got a machine, one of these duplicarver machines, and started to do delightful characters from Norwegian culture. And of course, there was the wonderful horse doll, hest tradition in Sweden that had been very, very strong. Toys for the kids. That was the tools for children. There's no question about that. This is a horse that some of you may be able to recognize. This was done, a very prized horse that I have that was done by Willy Sundqvist.
Who's now
And
deceased.
who passed away. And this is Jugge, his son, who has taught, of course, at both institutions here, both at Vesterheim and also at North House. On the other side, you can see this is his sort of pen name, or his name as a carver. He calls himself Sur-Ole, or Crabby-Ole. He has a whole story that goes along with, he has this alter ego, this person that is named Sur-Ole.
He's another one of the folk artists that was invited to Luther College for a January term and taught for about a week. This was several years ago. And so we have a number of pieces that have been made by him.
Spatula there.
Yeah. This is another piece by Jugge. Yeah.
Here's another one that I've done. Was inspired to do more mountain and skiing carvings after living in Telemark, in the mountains there. And this one, speaking of Rowland, this was a horse that I carved, and the saddle, the blanket, was woven by knitted by Ann-Marie Jorde, a friend who, this is her design. She was the one that designed the sweater that was the official sweater for the Olympics in 1991 when they were held in Lillehammer in Norway.
From figure carving, we are going to move to the contemporary moment. And we have a number of pieces by friends and artisans from both Vesterheim that have taught at Vesterheim, North House, around the country. Some of the pieces are large and we can't highlight them. And so what we've done is take pieces more from our kitchen. And so we have a mug, a coffee mug by Jared Dahl. And this is turned with a particular technique so that you don't cut off the handle. He's a wonderful artisan. There are a number of, the spoon that Harley used for the courting spoon, this one, very beautiful minimalist design, was done by Fred Livesey. A number of, this one, which I think is so sweet, we can't remember who did it, the little olive spoon. Sorry, if you did it, please say so. And then Harley has done a number of the sandwich and butter spreaders and then he teaches a Scandinavian fine handcraft at Luther College during January term. And they make a lot of these and colorose them and decorate them and come up with beautiful designs. So some of these are student made. This one is another one that shows it's made from a natural form and it's not cut from a dried piece of wood. Another, who did that one?
I did.
Oh, sorry, Harley did that one. This one is a kuksa by Alex Yerkes, who's a wonderful kuksa carver. This is a bowl done on a spring pole lathe by Roger Abrahamson. And you can see that when it's done on a spring pole, when it dries, it's green wood. It doesn't dry completely round, and it ends up with this lovely, almost an elliptical shape that then he has gone ahead and carved some embellishment in it. This is a loon bowl, actually Harley made this, but he took a class from Mike Leffler, who many of you know, and who has now a whole series of beautiful bird bowls, many different styles. And this is the loon bowl. And then this is a bowl. This is a bowl done by John Strum, and it's done with an axe and an adze. I took his class, wonderful class. I had great plans to make an enormous bowl. I'd seen one of his, and we're showing his, we're not showing mine. Mine didn't turn out quite like, I was way more ambitious than the class allowed for. And then we have another piece that isn't wooden, but it has the horse motif. And this is done by Jean and Lucy Tokheim. And as is, I have one other little knife to show, a piece of Jean Tokheim's work. It's heavily done, it's heavily embellished with silver, little bone handle, beautiful piece of jewelry, beautiful knife class. I don't think he's teaching them anymore, which is too bad because he's a wonderful teacher. And that essentially wraps up our little tour of pieces of folk art that we have. And we are constantly reminded that we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. They saw a need, they solved a problem, they embellished it with beautiful artwork, and they have now passed it on to us. And we're eternally grateful. We're grateful to all of you who are continue to be interested in folk art. And we wish you well on this day, these few days before Certain Demai. And yeah, we are so happy that we've been able to come into your home this evening. Thank you.
And I hope you're able to keep doing it. This is something that I call the healing art of craft. And this is a good time for us to be focusing our attention on something like this. Thank you to the sponsors for this time together.
Thank you so much, Harley and Norma. It's really wonderful to see inside your home this way. We have had a lot of questions come in, and I'm sure they'll keep coming if you are able to answer a couple. Let's see if I get, wonderful. There are a few here. Oh, there's a great question early on from our friend Darcy Holdorf at another school out east. She wondered, did Harley offer Norma a spoon during their courtship?
He did not. We'll be just plainly honest. He did not offer me a spoon.
I wasn't as good a carver, and there was a hole in it. And I thought, no, this isn't going to happen.
I got a clock that he made, but I did not get a spoon. I got a mangla today later on. The one that's back here, he did, and I got that later on. So, but good question. You would think maybe, but no. The answer would be no.
You'll just have to keep waiting, Norma, I guess.
I know.
Well, thanks, you guys. That was so wonderful. And I'll just, another question we had here. Thor is wondering, Harley, do you have a favorite wood type to carve? Is balsa wood too soft to work with, or what do you prefer?
I use basswood or linden. Here it's referred to as basswood, but in Europe, for example, it's called linden. It's the softest of the hardwoods that are still used. You can easily carve it.
It keeps detail.
Yeah.
Keeps it it's very hard, and yet it's still workable.
It's the softest, right, of the woods that are hard enough to take detail well. Balsa wood would be almost crumbly, almost like trying to carve styrofoam or cork. So I think it's safe to say that that basswood is the favored wood for figures.
Thank you.
Cynthia has a question, and it's seasonal and timely. Where do you get your birch bark?
We have, the birch bark that I've used, I've gotten all up in northern Minnesota. Mm-hmm. I was lucky enough to go on a birch bark harvesting trip one time, and which is pretty remarkable up in northern Minnesota. Anyway, and it depends on where you are, but the standard sort of rule of thumb is that you can harvest birch bark when the wild roses are blooming up around Grand Marais, in north of Grand Marais. And then you, once you harvest it, then it's stripping it and putting it into usable pieces. But yeah, all my birch bark has come from northern Minnesota.
Yeah, same here. It's either I've gotten pieces from John Zasada, from Charlie, from other people, but I haven't gone and peeled birch bark myself. No.
I would add that it also is a process that you need a permit for to do on public land. Yeah, but when done correctly, causes no lasting damage to the tree.
Right.
Great. Okay, well, we have a question for both of you, Harley and Norma. What is one food or meal you always seek out when you're in Norway?
Well, my tastes are very pedestrian. I love to go to the gatekjøkken and have a pølse med lompe, which is a hot dog on a piece of lefse with the sprøstekt løk or the dried onions on top of it. When I do that, I am back, just totally back. Either that or a soft ice cream from the different vendors as well. Those are quintessentially Norway to me. I almost hate to say that because they're so they're pretty common, but I like all the rest of the Norwegians. I love them.
And I'd be right beside her because that's I would be after the same health food like that. I'm after that.
We went to an agricultural fair called Dyrskuen in Seljord, and this was when our kids were along. And there they served rømmegrøt like we would serve cotton candy. I mean, you order the rømmegrøt and they gave you maybe 2 or 3 paper plates and just big ladles of rømmegrøt, and they were sort of trying to capture it and pour the melted butter and stand there like this. Well, they've loved it ever since. So rømmegrøt is pretty good too.
I like the kjøttboller, the meatballs.
Yep.
I like those, and I like lefse. I like well, I like just about. If we'd been there today for 17. Mai, I would have been just eating myself like that. I would have, yeah.
So pretty easy to please.
Yeah.
Let's see. Question from Nina. If you have more time these days, as many of us do, since you're not as busy teaching, are you working on any new or special projects?
I am. I'm working on a series. I had these back here. I wasn't going to. Okay, I'm working on a series of rings made out of. These are actually done out of silver, and I'm trying to come up with a prototype that I can then cast. And they're made out of the pewter. They're pewter. They're sterling that I've twisted so it looks like the pewter thread. And I'm trying to come up with a ring that I can then cast that's out of silver rather than out of pewter. So I have a whole bunch of, I've tried many different ones, and that's my current project. So yeah, we always have something cooking in our different studios.
I've been spending most days since these changes have come about. I've spent most of all day, every day, down in the basement carving figures. And
his days haven't changed. That's what he's done before this.
Except that I've done more of them. I think I'm just in these last days, I've probably done about 30 some carvings. So it's been, I've been down there. Yeah.
Great. I just want to show my carving because I have one of Harley's originals here. He carved one of my chickens, Della, for me. So thanks, Harley.
You're welcome.
I had to wear my bling tonight.
Good.
There's lots of questions. I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but Greg is wondering, what is your favorite carving figure to carve, Harley?
I don't mean this as a smart aleck one, but smart aleck answer, but it's the next one. And I like doing horses. I'm very hooked on Dala horses, and I've done a lot of horses that are, I mean, inspired by Dala horses. Obviously, they're my own version, but I enjoy carving horses. But I also enjoy doing tomte, nisse sort of figures. I rather do sort of fun ones rather than anything that's just too realistic.
But it's a lot of, he hasn't always done animals.
No.
The horses have been maybe more recent over the last 10 years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I also like to do sort of, now and then I do some kind of fun and funky birds or something like that are just
like your chicken.
Yeah. Well, much much weirder than that. Yours, I studied a book hard to try and get yours straight.
Thank you.
Let's see, a question about if you could repeat, in the beginning you talked a little bit about what Syttende is celebrating. Could you just refresh for everybody in case anyone missed it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Syttende is the Constitution Day for Norway. After the Napoleonic Wars, well, prior to that, Norway was linked with Denmark for several centuries. After the Napoleonic Wars, they lost. Norway desperately wanted to become an independent kingdom, and they felt that they were going to be ceded to Sweden. And so prior to that, they came up with their own constitution and had it signed at Eidsvoll in 1814. They were indeed ceded to Sweden. And so, but their Constitution Day remained their celebration day. They weren't allowed to celebrate for the first, for many years when they were linked to Sweden. Ultimately, that changed and the celebrations were allowed. And then in 1905, it was just a peaceful splitting of Norway from Sweden. So, but it's the Constitution Day that they celebrate, not any parting from Denmark or parting from Sweden, but it's declaring their own constitution.
Great. What do you think, Jessa? Do we have time for one more question, or what do you think?
Yeah, maybe one more question, and then I think we'll let folks move on with their evening.
Okay, great.
Is there one on there you saw that would make a great question?
Well, I think, people are first of all, people are wondering where to find your work, Harley and Norma. And so over here in the chat, I see that Justice has put some links to Harley, some of Harley's work, and also to the Vesterheim collection, so that people can see that we do have virtual galleries. So perhaps some of the things Harley referenced tonight, you'll be able to go online and see images. But do you both have virtual spaces, Etsy or websites where we can find your work?
I used to have an Etsy site. I don't anymore. I have sold. I would say it's in a more random manner. When I teach classes, I bring things along and I would sell. And I'd say Harley would do the same. Mm-hmm. Neither one of us. I used to be in a gallery up in Minnesota, and of course any gallery owner wants to depend on a continual number of pieces. And so we both sell, I would say, in a more casual manner. You're welcome to get in touch with either one of us. Mm-hmm. You can put our emails out there where we answer anything that we get. And oftentimes I'll send a whole bunch of photographs and let somebody decide. But what I think both of us like to do is encourage people to take classes. There's the pleasure of making it yourself is just unparalleled. Mm-hmm. If you can invest in a class and then you learn where you can get the materials, you learn the tools, and then you go on and you make your own. You can always buy something from us as well, but it's really nice to learn how to do it. So that's our plug.
When the I have, maybe not all the time, but I typically have figures for sale at both at Vesterheim, the shop there, and the sales shop at North House Folk School. So I usually have, and now that's kind of why I'm carving as much as I think what I'm carving now, I'm going to check with both of those shops and see if there's interest, and there'll be I think they have the store on their site too, so there'll be
A virtual store.
yeah. So I think I'll have pieces in both of those places for sure.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank Harley and Norma on behalf of North House and on behalf of Vesterheim for sharing your home and your evening with us. And thank all of you who joined us here. As you probably suspect, these are really interesting times for nonprofit organizations like North House and like Vesterheim, and finding ways to continue our mission like this is really meaningful to us, and is also only possible because of the support that many of you have given to our organizations. And so thank you to all of the members of both organizations. You make this possible. And if you'd like to become a member, you are more than invited to do so on both of our websites. And we depend on your support all the more during times like this when we aren't able to offer coursework. North House will be hosting another Thursday night program next week. We'll be welcoming one of our featured instructors from Basket Week last year, a gal by the name of Jo Campbell Amsler, who is a willow basket maker and has traveled all over Europe studying willow basket traditions that go back 8,000 years, and will be doing a travelogue of willow basketry work in Italy, Denmark, Spain, France, and England. So hopefully, if you don't have plans next Thursday, you can join us in this very same space. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you again, Harley and Norma. It's been lovely to join you, and I cannot wait until we can welcome you back to the North Shore and back to Vesterheim down the street, I bet.
Yes, I would
you.
just say, if people want to celebrate Syttende Mai, please do it virtually with Vesterheim. We have a whole lineup of things to do on our website, from kids activities to language lessons to a concert. And so please come and go Syttende Mai. Sorry, go Syttende Mai.
Go Syttende Mai.
We'd love to have you. And thanks again to Harley, Norma, and Jessa. It's just been a pleasure to be part of this tonight.
Thank you.
Talk furry dog, right? Something like that.
Talk footy dog.
Talk footy dog.
Yep.
Absolutely. You
Talk
got
footy
it.
dog.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.